My husband's eyes darkened, and he struck me. I was left gasping, every heartbeat a violent drum of betrayal, as the echoes of that confrontation reverberated through me. But what happened next, what he witnessed in the mirror of his own actions, left him utterly devastated, and in that split second, our lives would never be the same. I had always believed our marriage was built on unspoken promises and mutual respect, yet that evening, under the weight of harsh family judgment, everything unraveled. It began with a dinner meant to celebrate our anniversary, a night draped in soft lights, gentle laughter, and a careful veneer of normalcy. We sat together at the long, polished table in our elegantly decorated home, a place we had transformed over the years into a sanctuary of love and shared dreams. Our guests, our family, mingled pleasantly, the soft hum of conversation creating a backdrop of celebration. I felt the warmth of connection, the comfort of familiar faces. It was supposed to be a night of joy and renewal. But then came the unexpected words from his mother, sharp, unsparing, and full of contempt. In a tone that betrayed a lifetime of hidden resentments, she declared that my husband was a failure as a provider and a partner. The room fell into a stunned silence as her words, heavy with disdain, sank in. I watched in horror as the color drained from my husband's face. His eyes, once warm and reassuring, turned cold and distant. In that charged moment, something inside him snapped. The tension, previously contained like a coiled spring, exploded. His hand, driven by uncontrollable anger, lashed out, and before I could react, he struck me across the face. The shock of the assault, combined with the humiliation of that public display, sent tremors through my entire being. I felt the sting of pain and the surge of betrayal intertwine, leaving me both physically and emotionally wounded. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze. The voices around us, now a muffled, confused chorus, blended with the sound of my racing pulse. I struggled to comprehend what had just happened, my mind reeling with disbelief and sorrow. How had a night meant to celebrate our love turned into a scene of violence? I watched as my husband's expression transformed from anger to something deeper, a dawning realization that the consequences of his actions were far more devastating than he had imagined. In the aftermath, as the initial shock ebbed away, the atmosphere in the room grew thick with tension. My husband, still seething with rage, suddenly froze as if struck by an invisible force. His eyes darted toward the large mirror hanging on the wall, a mirror that had always reflected the loving, proud partner I once knew. In that moment, as he caught his own reflection, the raw, unfiltered horror of what he had done became impossible to ignore. The fury in his eyes was replaced by a dawning realization and then, shock, as if he saw in himself something monstrous that he had never recognized before. His hands trembled, and for the first time that night, I saw a vulnerability that belied his earlier outburst, a flash of regret that cut through the haze of anger. The transformation was as swift as it was tragic. In the silence that followed, his posture slumped and the hard lines of anger softened into a look of despair. The room, once filled with the sounds of a celebratory dinner, now resonated with a heavy, suffocating stillness. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, their murmurs subdued as they watched the scene unfold. I was left standing there, my face burning from both the physical blow and the shock of betrayal, while my husband, once the rock of our family, now looked as if he was drowning in the weight of his own actions. That night marked the beginning of an emotional tempest that would define the rest of my life. In the hours that followed, I sat alone in a dimly lit corner of our home, my heart pounding with a cocktail of pain, disbelief, and a deep sense of loss. I tried to recall every moment leading up to that fateful incident, the seemingly innocuous comments from his mother, the tension in the air as the evening progressed, and the subtle signs that something was amiss. All of it came rushing back in a torrent of memories that left me questioning every assumption I had held about our family and our future. In the solitude of the following days, I turned to my journal, a battered, leather-bound companion that had witnessed both my happiest and darkest moments. With trembling hands, I began to pour out my feelings, each word a desperate attempt to understand the unimaginable. I wrote about the betrayal, the shock of his violent outburst, and the sorrow of seeing him break in the mirror. I documented every detail, the cold, harsh words of his mother that had sparked his fury, the unbearable silence that had followed, and the crushing realization that our love had been tainted by a legacy of bitterness. My writing was raw and unfiltered, a cathartic release of emotions that I could no longer contain. Yet, even as I immersed myself in sorrow, a quiet voice within began to whisper that I was more than the sum of this moment, a fragile, persistent reminder that my worth was not defined by his actions or by the venomous words of his mother. I recalled the days when our love had been vibrant, when we had dreamed together of a future filled with hope and mutual respect. I clung to those memories as lifelines in the storm, determined not to let this act of violence and betrayal erase every good thing we had once shared. Deep within me, I felt the stirrings of resolve, a budding determination to reclaim my dignity and to find a way to move forward, no matter how shattered I felt. That promise, though fragile, was the seed of a new beginning. I began to ask myself hard questions. How had our love, once a sanctuary, crumbled so completely? What had led him to act in such a way, and more importantly, what did this mean for me and our future? I knew that the answers wouldn't come easily, but I also understood that I couldn't remain frozen in despair. I had to gather the pieces of my broken heart and start building something new, step by painstaking step. In the quiet aftermath, I resolved to confront not only the external chaos but also the internal wound that had been inflicted on my soul. I decided to seek professional help, a therapist who could help me navigate the tangled emotions of love, betrayal, and self-worth. I reached out to Dr. Amelia Chen, whose compassionate insights and steady guidance had a way of illuminating even the darkest corners of the mind. In our sessions, I began to unravel the layers of pain, learning that while I could not control his actions, I could control my response. Dr. Chen helped me see that every scar, however deep, was a testament to my survival, a marker of the strength I had built, even in the face of overwhelming despair. Slowly, through long sessions and quiet introspection, I began to see that the painful events of that night were not the end of my story, they were the beginning of a new chapter. I started setting small, achievable goals for myself, a daily walk in the park, reconnecting with friends who had always supported me, and even exploring new creative outlets like writing and painting. Each small victory was a defiant act against the forces that had tried to diminish my worth. I allowed myself to dream again, to imagine a future where I would not be defined by the violence or betrayal of the past, but by my own resilience and capacity for growth. As weeks turned into months, I began to see subtle shifts in my inner landscape. The acute pain of that night, though never fully erased, became interwoven with a growing determination to reclaim my life. I took solace in the simple act of writing, each journal entry a step toward healing, a reaffirmation that I was not broken, merely in the process of being remade. I even started sharing snippets of my journey on a private blog, receiving messages from others who had experienced similar betrayals, whose words of encouragement and solidarity added a flicker of hope to my heart. One crisp afternoon, while sitting on the balcony of my modest apartment and watching the sun cast long shadows on the city below, I made a quiet vow to myself. I promised that I would rise from the depths of this heartbreak, that I would not let the violent act and the bitter betrayal define me. I was determined to transform the pain into a force for renewal, a catalyst that would propel me toward a future filled with new beginnings, stronger relationships, and a rediscovered sense of self. I resolved that I would rebuild my life piece by piece, embracing each small victory as proof that I was more than the sum of my scars. And so, with the silent promise of a new dawn echoing in my heart, I began to move forward. I gathered the strength to face each day, to navigate the labyrinth of emotions that had threatened to engulf me, and to lay the foundation for a future that was unequivocally my own. Though the path ahead was uncertain, I knew one undeniable truth: my journey from betrayal to renewal had only just begun, and every step I took was a step toward reclaiming my destiny and proving that I was, in the deepest sense, enough. I woke the next morning in a haze of shock and physical pain, every bruise a searing reminder of what had transpired the night before. The assault still pulsed through my body, a dull ache mixed with an overwhelming sense of betrayal. In the silent, grey light of dawn, I sat on the edge of our bed, the room echoing with memories of violence and regret. My mind replayed every moment in agonizing detail, the icy tone of her mother's words, the moment my husband's anger boiled over, and then the sudden, inexplicable pause when he caught sight of something that left him visibly devastated. It wasn't long after he struck me that I saw the shift in him, a look of horror, regret, and raw self-disgust flickering across his face as if he had witnessed his own reflection in a mirror of his soul. In that tumultuous aftermath, I felt as if the world had split into two separate realms, one where the violent echo of his actions reigned, and another where a secret truth, one buried deep for years, began to surface. I barely recognized the man who had become my husband. His fierce anger was now replaced with a haunted silence, and for a long moment, he simply stared, as if trying to reconcile what he had just done with who he thought he was. The atmosphere in our once safe home had turned icy, charged with the electricity of unspoken truths and the heavy weight of shattered illusions. For hours, I lay there, trying to piece together the fragments of that night. I felt numb, not just physically, but emotionally disoriented, a woman caught in the crossfire of fury and regret. I wondered what had sparked that devastating transformation in him, that sudden shift from violent anger to an almost unbearable despair. In the corners of my mind, I remembered his mother's words, a verbal wound that had cut deeper than I ever expected. They had always been sharp, but that night, they had ignited something primal in him. And then, as if by some cruel twist of fate, he had seen something, a moment of truth that broke through his rage, leaving him trembling and devastated. I couldn't tell if he had caught sight of his own reflection or if the act of violence had unmoored something inside him, but it was clear that the consequences of his actions were far more complex than a simple outburst. Over the next few days, our home became a battleground of silence and tentative reckoning. I nursed my bruises, both visible and hidden, and every time my husband's eyes met mine, I saw an ocean of sorrow and self-loathing swirling behind them. The tension was palpable, a heavy cloud that neither of us knew how to dissipate. He would wander the house in long, tormented silences, and I would find myself alone in the kitchen, replaying the night's events in an endless loop. I began to ask myself harsh questions. Was this violence a one-time lapse, or had it been a symptom of a deeper, festering darkness within our marriage? And most painfully, was there a secret he had witnessed, something that even he could not come to terms with, that drove him to such devastation? I eventually gathered enough courage to confront him. One cold afternoon, I found him in the study, hunched over old family photographs, his face hidden in shadow. I approached him cautiously, my heart pounding in my ears. "What did you see?" I whispered, voice trembling between fear and desperate hope. For what seemed like an eternity, he remained silent, and I could see his hands shaking as he clenched and unclenched in a futile attempt to hold himself together. Finally, with a broken sigh, he turned to me, his eyes glistening with tears that carried the weight of a lifetime of secrets. It's not something I expected to see," he began haltingly, his voice thick with remorse. "I thought I knew everything about us, about our family. But last night, I saw things that made me realize how much I've been lying to myself." His words were vague, almost as if he was trying to shield himself from the full truth. I pressed him gently, needing to understand the cause of his sudden, unbearable despair. "What did you see?" I asked again, my voice barely a whisper. He hesitated, and then, as if summoning every ounce of courage, he said, "I found out about the secrets your father has kept hidden for years. I saw records, documents, proof that everything we believed about our family's history was a lie." His eyes, wide with horror, scanned mine as if pleading for forgiveness, for understanding. The revelation hit me like a freight train. My husband's anguish was not solely about the moment of violence, but about uncovering truths that I had been oblivious to, truths that threatened to unravel the very fabric of our family. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of vindication and despair. The betrayal was twofold. Not only had he struck me, driven by the venom of her mother's insults, but his violent outburst had been triggered by the discovery of my father's hidden secrets. Secrets that had been carefully concealed for years, secrets that now seemed to reconfigure everything I had thought I knew about our family. My mind raced with questions. What had my father done? How had these secrets been hidden from me? And why had my husband not told me sooner? The shock of his confession was overwhelming, yet it also lit a spark of understanding within me. It was clear that our marriage, our lives, were built on a foundation riddled with deception. My husband's assault was not merely an act of uncontrolled anger, it was the explosion of years of suppressed pain and hidden truths. As he continued, his voice breaking with the weight of his revelations, he described finding old financial ledgers, hidden bank statements, and correspondence that suggested a legacy of betrayal and manipulation, all orchestrated by my own father. It seemed that our family's wealth, our cherished history, had been built on secrets and lies, a truth so devastating that even my husband, in his darkest moment, could not ignore it. That revelation brought with it a painful clarity. I realized that our love, our trust, had been undermined by forces far beyond a simple marital dispute. The walls of our home, which I had believed to be filled with warmth and shared memories, now resonated with the echoes of deception. I felt betrayed on multiple fronts, by my husband, whose violent outburst had shocked even him, and by the legacy of lies that had tainted our family. The knowledge of these hidden secrets shattered the remaining shards of the life I had believed in, leaving me to wonder if our future could ever be rebuilt on such a fractured foundation. In the days that followed that fateful conversation, I found myself grappling with an avalanche of emotions. Anger and betrayal warred with sorrow and, strangely, a nascent sense of liberation. The truth, as painful as it was, had freed me from the illusions I had clung to for so long. I began to see that while my husband's actions had been unforgivable, the deeper betrayal lay in the secrets that had been kept from both of us, secrets that had sown the seeds of distrust and resentment. I took refuge in quiet moments of reflection, walking along deserted streets under a sky heavy with unspoken grief. In those solitary walks, I let the rhythm of my footsteps and the cool night air ground me, slowly piecing together the shattered remnants of my identity. I started to see that my worth was not tied to the facade of a perfect marriage or a pristine family history, but in my own ability to confront the truth, however painful, and to forge a path forward that was honest and real. I reached out to my own therapist, Dr. Elena Martin, who helped me navigate the swirling emotions of betrayal and discovery. In our sessions, I learned that healing often begins with acknowledging the darkness before embracing the light. The truth, as harsh as it may be, is the first step toward rebuilding, she told me gently during one particularly raw session. Once you face the deception, you have the power to redefine your future. Her words, steeped in empathy and wisdom, resonated deeply and slowly began to guide me out of the maze of despair. As the weeks turned into a blur of painful revelations and tentative steps toward healing, I found that I was gradually reclaiming pieces of myself that had been lost amid the betrayal. I started to write again, this time, not as an act of sorrow but as a declaration of my emerging strength. I chronicled my journey in long, winding entries that detailed not just the agony of discovering the secrets that had torn us apart, but also the small victories, the supportive words from a friend, a moment of unexpected laughter amid tears, a breakthrough in understanding that perhaps the past, no matter how dark, could be a stepping stone to a better future. I began to envision a future where I could use this painful experience as a catalyst for transformation. I resolved to confront the hidden legacies of our family, not to expose them publicly, but to understand them, to learn from them, and to ensure that they would no longer dictate my self-worth. I decided that I would gather all the evidence and confront my parents, not out of revenge, but to reclaim the narrative of my life. I needed to know why these secrets had been kept hidden from me, and what impact they would have on the future I was determined to build. In those moments of deep introspection, I also recognized the complexity of my husband's own anguish. His violent outburst, while inexcusable, had been triggered by a discovery that shook him to his core, a discovery that revealed the lies and manipulations that had shaped our family's legacy. I began to see that his devastation was not just for me, but for the loss of a shared truth, a shared history that had been built on deception. This realization forced me to confront my own feelings about our marriage. Was our love truly a sanctuary if it had been so deeply compromised by secrets? And could we ever rebuild trust when the foundations had been so profoundly shaken? As I sat at my kitchen table one chilly morning, my fingers tracing the faded ink of the letter I had received from my parents regarding our family's hidden financial dealings, I felt an unexpected surge of clarity. I realized that this was a turning point, a moment where the pain of betrayal could be transformed into the power to redefine my life. I knew that I would have to make some hard choices in the coming days, to decide whether to confront my husband and my parents about these secrets, or to let them remain buried in the past. But one thing was clear, I could no longer live in the shadow of lies. I had to reclaim my narrative, to rebuild my identity from the ground up, and to create a future that was truly my own. With each passing day, as I sifted through old records, engaged in long, cathartic conversations with my therapist, and poured my heart into my journal, I began to see the beginnings of a new self, a version of me that was scarred yet unbroken, vulnerable yet fiercely resilient. I resolved to move forward, to harness the bitter lessons of the past as the fuel for a rebirth that would be defined not by betrayal, but by the triumph of truth and the indomitable strength of the human spirit. Now, as I stand on the cusp of confronting the hidden truths that have haunted our family for years, I feel a quiet determination that has replaced the searing pain of that night. I have learned that every scar, every tear shed in isolation, is a testament to my survival and a reminder that I hold the power to shape my destiny. With each new sunrise, I promise myself that I will no longer be defined by the secrets and lies of the past. Instead, I will embrace the truth, learn from it, and build a future where my worth is measured by the strength of my character and the authenticity of my journey. I woke that morning drenched in cold sweat and trembling uncertainty, my body still bearing the marks of the violent night, my mind a chaotic tangle of shock, regret, and a dawning realization that everything had changed in an instant. I recalled how, in the wake of her mother's cruel words, my husband had lashed out, and then, in a moment so raw and jarring, he had stopped, his anger replaced by a horror so profound that it seemed to shatter the very air around him. I had been left stunned, not only by the physical blow but by the silence that followed. His eyes, wide and haunted, had locked onto a mirror across the room, as if in that reflection he had seen a truth too terrible to bear. What he witnessed next, his own reflection marred by the immediate aftermath of violence and the undeniable weight of betrayal, left him utterly devastated. That moment, in which he finally confronted the mirror of his own soul, marked the turning point of our unraveling lives. 4 days afterward, our home became a battleground of raw emotions and unspoken questions. I wandered through our quiet, dimly lit living room, each step echoing in the silence as I tried to process the night's events. The taste of regret was bitter on my tongue, and the sight of him, sitting alone in the study with his head in his hands, haunted me relentlessly. His breakdown was a private, anguished admission that what he had done was not merely a lapse of temper, it was the catastrophic result of years of pent-up resentment, suppressed insecurities, and a legacy of family secrets that we had both been blind to for too long. In the days that followed, I found myself caught in an emotional limbo. On one hand, I was overwhelmed by the physical and emotional scars of the assault, the bruises on my face, the pain that throbbed in my muscles, the raw shock of betrayal that made every heartbeat feel like a heavy drum. On the other, there was a somber curiosity, a desperate need to understand what had driven him to that fateful act and what was it that he had seen in that mirror which left him so shattered. The questions gnawed at me incessantly. Had he seen the monster in himself? Had the mirror, reflecting not just his body but the full spectrum of his guilt, forced him to face a self he had long denied? Unable to bear the silence any longer, I finally approached him one quiet afternoon. The house was silent except for the faint hum of a television in the next room. I found him in the study, his face half hidden in the dim glow of a desk lamp, eyes red-rimmed and distant. "What did you see?" I asked, my voice a trembling whisper that carried the weight of unshed tears and unspoken truths. 4 long, agonizing minutes, he said nothing, only a soft, ragged sigh escaped him as he slowly turned to face me, his eyes brimming with a mixture of sorrow, horror, and reluctant clarity. I saw everything," he stuttered, voice cracking under the burden of his own despair. "I saw the anger and hate I've been carrying inside me, the anger that's built up over all these years, and I saw the man I've become. I saw the face of someone I no longer recognize. It was as if that mirror stripped away all the lies, all the pretenses, and I was forced to confront the truth. I'm a failure, a man who has hurt the one person I claim to love most." His words fell like leaden droplets in the stillness of the room, and I could see the tears glistening on his cheeks, each one a silent admission of regret and anguish. In that raw, heart-wrenching moment, my own pain intermingled with a quiet understanding. I had been wounded, yes, but his breakdown was not simply about the physical violence, it was the result of confronting a long-buried truth, a truth about our family's legacy and about the person he had allowed himself to become. My mind raced back to the many times I had felt dismissed, my own feelings diminished by his arrogance and the weight of his family's expectations. I remembered the subtle signs, his sullen silence after arguments, the furtive glances he cast at old photographs, and even the way his eyes would darken at the mention of his mother's critical words. It was all culminating in that terrible moment when his rage exploded and then evaporated into a flood of self-reproach. For the next several days, our home was a study in sorrowful introspection. I moved through the house like a ghost, half present, half lost in my own thoughts, while my husband withdrew into himself, haunted by his own reflection and the bitter consequences of his actions. I took time to care for my physical wounds, visiting a doctor who patched up my bruises and offered a few kind words of reassurance. Yet, even as my body began to heal, my heart remained heavy with a mixture of grief, anger, and an uncertain hope that perhaps this tumultuous moment might lead to some form of redemption. Determined not to let the night's horror define our entire future, I sought the help of a trusted therapist, Dr. Elena Martin, whose warm presence and insightful questions slowly coaxed me out of the spiral of despair. In our sessions, I poured out every raw detail, my shock at his violent outburst, the inexplicable look of devastation that had overtaken him, and my own deep sense of betrayal and loss. Dr. Martin gently encouraged me to explore not only the external events but also the inner landscape of my emotions. "Sometimes," she said softly, "when we see our reflection, we are confronted with the parts of ourselves we've been afraid to acknowledge. It's painful, but it's also the first step toward true healing." Her words resonated with me, and I began to understand that while I had every right to feel hurt and betrayed, I could choose to use this experience as a catalyst for growth, a painful but necessary process of transformation. Slowly, as I continued therapy and deep introspection, I began to see the contours of a new future emerging from the ruins of that dark night. I resolved that our marriage, battered as it was by violence and raw emotion, might never return to what it once was, but it could evolve into something different, if we both were willing to confront the truth, to accept our own shortcomings, and perhaps, in time, to forgive. I contemplated whether there was a way for him to redeem himself, to atone for the moment of violence by confronting the root of his anger and despair. I wondered if we could rebuild some semblance of trust, or if the betrayal was so deep that our paths had irrevocably diverged. These questions, though painful, were now the impetus for a deeper exploration of who we were and what we wanted our future to be. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult session with Dr. Martin, I gathered the courage to have a long, heart-to-heart conversation with my husband. In the quiet privacy of our living room, where the afternoon light filtered softly through gauzy curtains, I sat across from him. The air was thick with unspoken tension as I began. "I need to understand what happened last night. I need to know what you saw when you looked in the mirror." He looked away, his eyes moist, and for a long, agonizing moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I saw the truth about me, the anger, the pain, and the ways I've hurt you. I saw a man who has been drowning in his own failures, and I realized that I've become someone I can't stand." His confession, raw and unvarnished, cut through the silence. I felt a strange mix of sorrow and, unexpectedly, a flicker of empathy. I had been hurt deeply, but here he was, finally acknowledging the monster that had taken hold of him. That conversation marked the beginning of a slow, painful process of reconciliation and self-discovery for both of us. We agreed to take a break from our familiar routines, to seek individual therapy, to attend couples counseling, and to spend time apart to reflect on what we truly wanted from life. It was not an easy decision, and the path ahead was uncertain. But as I sat there, holding his hand, I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps, even in the aftermath of such profound betrayal, there was a chance for healing. I understood that our journey would be long and fraught with setbacks, but I was determined not to let that one devastating night define the rest of my life. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild my world piece by piece. I took long walks in the early morning light, allowing the fresh air to clear my mind and remind me that each new day was an opportunity to start anew. I resumed writing in my journal, documenting every step of my emotional journey, from the depths of despair to the tentative moments of hope. I even started a private blog, sharing my experiences in the hope that my story might help others who had faced similar betrayals. The supportive comments and messages from strangers, each sharing their own tales of recovery, were a lifeline, affirming that I was not alone in my struggle. At work, I channeled the turbulent emotions into creative energy. Every project became a silent declaration that I would not be defined by one moment of violence or by the cruel secrets of our past. I started leading new initiatives that reflected my renewed vision, challenging the old ways and pushing for innovation and empathy in every decision. My colleagues, witnessing the transformation in my demeanor and the quiet strength with which I tackled challenges, began to see me in a new light, a person who had not only survived the storm but had learned to harness its power. Through all of this, I continued to grapple with the legacy of that night and the long-hidden family secrets that had emerged. My husband's confession about what he had discovered, those damning documents and hidden ledgers that revealed the manipulation and deceit within our family's financial history, remained a heavy burden. I knew that those secrets, once uncovered, had the power to alter everything we believed about our past. I resolved to confront these truths head-on, not in anger but in pursuit of understanding. I reached out to my parents, demanding answers about the hidden transactions and covert decisions that had haunted our family for so long. The conversations were fraught with tension and laden with decades of unspoken grievances, but they were also a necessary step toward reclaiming the truth. In time, as the legal proceedings of our divorce advanced and the painful secrets of our family's legacy began to surface, I found that my own strength had grown immeasurably. I was no longer the frightened, shattered woman who had once been assaulted by the tempest of my husband's rage. I was a survivor, someone who had faced the darkest depths of betrayal and emerged, though scarred, with a clear vision for her future. I learned to embrace the pain as part of my story, a chapter that, while painful, was ultimately a prelude to my rebirth. One crisp winter morning, as I sat by the window watching the frost etch delicate patterns on the glass, I took a deep, steadying breath and made a promise to myself. I would build a future defined not by the cruelty of the past but by the limitless potential of who I could become. I enrolled in courses to further my education, networked with inspiring individuals, and even began exploring creative pursuits that allowed me to express my inner truth. I started painting again, vivid, abstract canvases that captured the tumult of my emotions and the vibrant hope that was slowly blooming within me. As the months passed, the scars of that night became less like raw wounds and more like badges of honor, reminders of the battles I had fought and the strength I had discovered in the crucible of betrayal. I learned that true redemption was not about erasing the past but about integrating it into the person I was becoming. I began to see my journey as a tapestry of pain and triumph, a story that, while marred by deep hurt, was also illuminated by the courage to rise and the resilience to rebuild. Now, as I stand on the cusp of a new chapter in my life, I carry with me not only the memories of what was lost but also the profound wisdom that only adversity can bestow. I have learned that every betrayal, every moment of violence, every secret that tore at the very fabric of my soul, has led me to this point, a point where I can finally say that I am whole, I am strong, and I am in control of my destiny. I have taken the broken pieces of our shattered lives and have begun to rebuild them into something beautiful, a future where my worth is defined by my own terms, where I am no longer a victim of betrayal but a creator of my own happiness. I know that the road ahead will be challenging. There will be days when the ghosts of that night will return, when the weight of our past will seem almost too heavy to bear. But I have learned to embrace those moments as part of my journey, a journey of self-discovery, growth, and ultimately, redemption. Every step I take, every decision I make, is a testament to the unyielding spirit within me, a spirit that has been tempered by pain and strengthened by perseverance. With each sunrise, I renew my commitment to myself, to honor the strength that has carried me this far and to build a future that reflects the true essence of who I am. I will continue to write, to create, and to inspire, sharing my story in the hope that it might light the way for others who have been lost in the shadows of betrayal. I am no longer defined by that one horrific night. I am defined by the journey I have taken since, a journey that has taught me that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit can rise, rebuild, and shine with a brilliance that no one can ever take away. Today, I stand at the threshold of a new beginning, a moment filled with the promise of transformation, resilience, and boundless hope. My past, with all its pain and betrayal, will always be a part of me, but it will not hold me back. I am determined to forge ahead with courage, to embrace the challenges that lie before me, and to build a legacy that celebrates my triumph over adversity. I am the architect of my destiny, and with every breath, I affirm that my worth is immeasurable, my potential limitless, and my future entirely my own.